Head for the apocalyptic bunkers because Equestria, as we know, could be in grave danger. After all this show has been through, it seems like close to nothing can beat our main characters here. Not even Discord, Nightmare Moon, or Chrysalis. Discord is probably the most powerful out of any of them, but he's more in it for the laughs than anything. When you think about it, he's honestly not even all that evil. Chrysalis intended to take over everything, sure, but we don't really know how or why, or even how the changelings would feed on others. My guess though is that the worst they would do is encasing all of them in sorts of cocoons and feeding on their love that way. But even then, they would probably end up in some sort of cryogenic state and wouldn't really be suffering at all. And Nightmare Moon only ever really wanted to make it night all the time, and get rid of Celestia. That would make things very hard, but with the lack of sunlight to grow food or to make heat. But couldn't everyone just move to the other side of the world? Or even like halfway there? All of these characters are villains, but they seem to have their limits. There is one, however, who doesn't seem to have any limits on his morals, and that's Sombra. He not only intended to take over and ruin the entire Crystal Empire, and maybe even eventually all of Equestria, but he also enslaved everyone. His reign was so terrible that the Crystal Ponies shuddered to think about it, and tried to suppress any and all memory they have of it. I have little to no doubt that he is the most evil of any of the villains, but then wasn't he defeated? We saw him break apart and his horn flying off into the distance. But maybe that wasn't the end of our evil overlord. The easiest conclusion to come up with is to say, hey, his horn could grow back when it was cut off. Maybe he's like some sort of pony starfish and can grow the rest of his body back from just his horn. But I personally have a hard time believing this at all, because when his horn was cut off last, it didn't grow a Sombra clone, it just made a large crystal obelisk looking thing. Unless Sombra can hatch from a crystal like an egg, I don't think this theory would ever work. Although that doesn't mean that this is the last we'll see of Sombra. In researching Sombra and his possible origins and that sort of thing, I found some pretty interesting ideas and boasts. It's easy to overlook since we only see him for a few minutes, but his appearance alone has a lot of interesting aspects. For one thing, he's one of the darkest colored characters we ever see in the show. He wears dark colored armor, he has some very significant eye signs, but one of the most striking things is that on his crown is a circle with two curved spires. Being a pretty huge Lord of the Rings nut, this immediately reminded me of Sauron's tower in Mordor, but that would be a pretty big stretch. Upon further investigation though, I found something that's pretty amazing. That the Crystal Empire isn't the only place we see Sombra. In fact, we see him much closer to home, the Alicorn Amulet. The same black unicorn, the same red eyes, the shining metal texture, a menacingly red crystal right in the middle. Not only that, but the effects it had on Trixie are very similar to how Sombra's reign was described. She herself had momentarily red eyes, light smoke emitting from them, and she even treated others like slaves. Those similarities are a bit too much for me to just shrug off. Perhaps this amulet of unknown past was originally owned by, and maybe even created by Sombra. But then, what about those wings? It is the Alicorn amulet after all. Sombra doesn't look particularly like an Alicorn to me. But then this happened.
It only responds to Alicorn magic.
So, Sombra's magic is Alicorn magic? Then why was Twilight able to use it? Well, she was already on the path to becoming an Alicorn anyway, so maybe she was just able to use it a little prematurely. After all, we don't see anybody else use it besides Celestia, and she's an Alicorn. So what kind of implications does this have about Sombra? Was he on his way to becoming an Alicorn himself, therefore able to use that magic prematurely? Maybe he was Celestia's pupil too. I heard one interesting theory that Star Swirl, who might have been Celestia's former pupil as well, being a pony with intense power, delved too far into darker paths and became Sombra. After all, Celestia herself said that Star Swirl didn't understand friendship, and I'm pretty sure Sombra doesn't. The timeline seems to work. It was 1,000 years ago that Sombra was banished. Star Swirl was around even before Equestria was founded, since his apprentice, Clover the Clever, was present during the reenactment of its founding. It wouldn't be at all hard to believe that their lives intersect sometime. The Alicorn Amulet was shown to severely corrupt its user. If Star Swirl made it, perhaps its effects eventually became permanent, altering his appearance and personality until he did become Sombra. Due to how ambiguous both Sombra and Star Swirl are, it is possible that the princesses were somewhat ashamed about how intense of a failure mentoring him was, so they named a wing in the cast after him as a memorial of the little good that he did, and then tried to mop up the rest. It does seem possible, and I don't see any major issues with this theory as of yet. In fact, I wouldn't object to this theory at all if it weren't for the fact that I realized something else that seems much more likely and much more concerning. Plus, I like the idea of Sorcerer being connected to Discord more. It is possible that Sombra was on his way to becoming an Alicorn himself, but there is another possibility. What if he was already an Alicorn? I doubt Celestia would tell Twilight he was an Alicorn just because it would be unsettling and bring up questions, hence why she would call him a unicorn. In his normal form, he always wore a red cloak, covering the spot where any wings might be. But then, if he had wings, wouldn't he have just flown up and grabbed the crystal heart instead of riding a rock to it? Well, if he was an Alicorn, I'm sure he had wings under that cloak at some point, but maybe not at the end. The elements of harmony are necklaces and amulet in their modern state, but they once had different forms and varying shapes. Of course, we never see Sombra wearing the amulet around his neck, but maybe that's because the Amulet 2 had another form, one that would, say, hang on his wings, like a clasp underneath his cloak. Now, imagine how powerful Sombra would be with the amulet. He already has Alicorn magic and can control crystals. With the amulet, he'd be nearly invincible. He could be as powerful as Discord even. We don't know what limits the amulet has in the hands of his creator. But the only one who can remove the amulet is the one wearing it. And I doubt Sombra would trade his amulet for anything if he was the one who made it. So how else would that kind of power be removed from him? If they couldn't simply take off the amulet, maybe they could take away the amulet's resting place. Suddenly, that allusion to Sauron doesn't seem like such a stretch. What if Alicorn King Sombra had his wings cut off to separate him from a source of power? In the scene showing his initial defeat, he is in midair, so maybe his wings were just cut off at that point. Even if there were slits for his wings to come through the cloak, it would still be able to hide any scars or cuts like that just fine. It could be said that his wings would grow back like his horn did, but then what if all unicorn horns grew back? I mean, it's their source of magic. If anything is going to grow back, it's their horn. We never see anybody else with a broken horn or anything like that, and maybe it's because they all grow back. But even if they don't, Sombra would have had immense power, all of which radiated from his horn. Just because it grows back doesn't mean that anything else will. Wings are pretty much an entire limb. A horn is little more than a big magic fingernail. If Sombra is an allusion to Sauron, then this opens a floodgate of implications. Sauron was originally an Arnur, a sort of angelic being that existed before creation. Gandalf, Saruman, and the other wizards were all Maiar, which are basically just lesser Ainur. In Antony C and BronyCurious video, reviewing his magic, they compare the Alicorns to these angelic beings in Tolkien's world too. If Sombra, an Alicorn like Luna and Celestia, is an allusion to Sauron, that works very nicely. Sauron also had an artifact of power which he created, the Ring of Power. It also severely corrupted its wearers, and if worn too long, the effects could be permanent. What if the same could be said about the Alicorn amulet? So basically, wing wraiths. They should be a thing. One of the most significant things about this ring is that as long as it existed, Sauron could not be defeated. Now if you'll remember back with me, what did Twilight and Zecora do with the amulet?
Going back into hiding where it belonged.
We put it away. Keep it hidden. We never speak of it again.
No! The ring sustained Sauron's survival, though not quite in his original state. Similarly, Sombra survived his defeat, though not in his original state either. The Alicorn amulet still exists as the ring did. That can only mean that Sombra is still alive, mustering all strength he can to make another return. With each return, Sauron only seems to grow stronger. Eventually he had an army greater than anything Middle-earth could muster. A return of similar proportions for Sombra doesn't seem so far off.